Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking Math for Business and Finance and Math Applications, and we are working on the Chapter 17 theory videos. This chapter is about depreciation, and this was like part 2 of our units of production. I'm sorry, part 2 of our declining balance method. Okay, let me erase all of this and pick up where we left off. Like it said in the previous video, if you didn't understand what was in the rest of the video, in the other previous video, finish watching this, and then if you don't understand, go back and watch both together. And if you still don't understand, contact an instructor. But quickly go over it. In the last video, we had when we're using the declining balance, we had to come up with a rate. So we take the 100% and we divide it by the useful life of the asset. In this case here, for this example, we're using 5 years. So that gave us 20%, and we multiply that by whatever factor we decided, and then we can use a factor of up to 2. So in this example, we are using 2, which gives us 40%. Okay. Now, we create a schedule of depreciation, okay, and this schedule is, has just a couple of nuances from the others. You'll see that these two columns, all right, we have an accumulated depreciation here and a book value here, but these are for the beginning of the year, okay, and our last two columns are pretty much the same as the other schedules we looked at for straight line and units of production, and they're for the, they're for the end of the year. Okay. And of course, the column in the middle here for depreciation is where everything happens in calculating how much depreciation. And we'll see how that works. Okay. So in doing the declining balance, before I go any further into this schedule, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what that rate is. Okay. The other thing that you have to pay attention to when you're looking at a declining balance is our book value is going to go down, okay, over the course of time, over the course of the years. Okay. Remember, we start out with a purchase price of $2,500. And we say we want a residual value of $500, which means we can only depreciate the asset by $2,000. But because we're using a percentage of the book value, we're going to end up taking, and the math has already been done here, and I'll cover the math, but I'm using it as an example to illustrate this point. You see, in the very first year, our depreciation is $1,000. That's the most we can depreciate in the first year. But each year after that, you see it starts to decline. I went down to 600, and it went down to 360, and lastly we have 40. Okay. Now the reason why, yes, we have to keep in the back of our mind that we're going to start out with the greatest, and it's going to decline every year. That's why it's a declining balance. But we have an issue in later years. Okay. Notice here that our book value is 540. Okay. Well, you'll see that when I go to, and this here is in year 3. Okay. It's not year 5. It's only in year 3. So when I go into year 4 and I do my calculation based upon, you'll see the calculations in a bit, I actually can, if I do the calculation for the depreciation expense, it tells me I should be able to take $216 of depreciation, okay? But I can't do that. Yeah, it's $216 of the 540, but I set a limit for my salvage value of 500. So when my depreciation expense is greater than the amount that I can depreciate, in other words, when I've depreciated the full amount of the $2,000, well, I can only take the amount of depreciation that brings me up to that 2,000. So if I have 540 here and I have a salvage value of 500, right? That means I can only take $40 of depreciation, not the full $216, okay? That's how I look at it, and I keep a running tab in the, or on the side or in the back of my mind. I pay attention to this column. Well, you could look at it from a different perspective, in that, like I said, we can only depreciate in a maximum amount of 2,000. So when I'm doing my accumulated depreciation here, notice that I hit 1,000, then I had 1,600, then I hit 1,960. Well, if the most I can take is 2,000, well, the difference between those two is $40, and that's the same $40 there. Even though I calculate my depreciation at 216, I can only take the $40. So I can use either column in order to determine how much that depreciation is at that point in time. And then, of course, that was in year 4. Okay. Well, what do I do with year 5? Well, year 5 has 0 in depreciation, right? Because I had already maximally depreciated my asset, and I did that by taking the using the declining balance and taking the most in year 1, and then working my way down. Okay, so how does the schedule work? Yes, we have our years here, and yes, we have our cost of equipment. Okay, now remember, these two columns here is for the beginning of the year. So at the beginning of the year, my accumulated depreciation is 0. Okay, and my book value is 2,500 because that's my purchase price. Okay? Now we take our 2,500 and we have to the book value from the beginning of the year, and we multiply it by our rate of 40%, and that gives me $1,000 for depreciation expense for the year. Now here they're showing you the math, okay? And on a real schedule, you would not have this math, all right? That's there for illustration purposes. People who are looking at schedules of, depreciation should know these methods and shouldn't have to be told what the math is. So they're for illustration purposes only. So in that first year, we're going to depreciate the maximum amount, which is $1,000. Okay, so these two columns, of course, they're for the end of the year, right? So at the beginning of year 1, my accumulated depreciation was 0. So I add 0 plus my 1,000 for the year, and that gives me my new accumulated depreciation at the end of the year for $1,000. And just like in the other schedules, I would take my cost less my accumulated depreciation, and that equals my new book value of $1,500. Okay? Except for the calculation using the rate, there's nothing different here than what you've done before. Now, here's the when we come into year 2, yeah, we still have this here, $2,500 is my cost. But what I had for values in my accumulated and my book value at the end of year 1 now become my beginning balances for year 2. So all I'm doing is just transferring those numbers. Now, since my book value was $1,500 at this point in time at the end of year 1, I'm going to do the same thing I did, for year 1 and multiply the new book value of $1,500 by the 40%. Okay, and that's where you see this illustration of the math here. So that gives me a depreciation for the year of $600. Okay. So my new depreciation for year 2 is $600, and for these remaining columns, we're doing the same thing. We're taking the previous year balance plus the depreciation for this year, gives us our new accumulated depreciation of $1,600. And we take our $2,500 less our $1,600, and that gives us a new book value of $900 at the end of year 2. and now it's just repetitive. It's just a process. But yeah, you have to kind of go through all of the steps in the process. Okay, so we have 1600 and 900 at the end of year 2. They become our new balances for year 3. And since we have $900 as our new book value, again, multiply it by the rate of 40%, okay? And that gives us $360 for the depreciation for this year. And with the depreciation of 360, okay, in my accumulated depreciation column, 1600 plus this year's 360 gives me a new accumulated depreciation of 1960. And again, 2500 less 1960 gives me a new book value of 540. But now here's here's where I have to start paying attention to things, okay? Because with my I'm going to bring my accumulated depreciation of 1960, and that becomes the beginning balance for 4, and my book value of 540 becomes the beginning balance for year 4. But I have to pay attention here, because as I'm looking at this 540, remember, I can only depreciate up to $500. So that means going into year 4, the most I can depreciate will be $40. Well, I'll do the calculation, right? I'll take 540 and multiply it by the 40%, and I find out that I get $216 in depreciation. I can't take the full $216 in depreciation. I can only take the $40. And that's why in this column for the year, the depreciation is only $40. Okay? And of course, I take my accumulated depreciation from the previous year plus the depreciation for this year gives me my new accumulated depreciation of 2000. Well, remember, we can only depreciate up to the 2000. We had a purchase price of 2500 less the salvage value of 500, so I can only depreciate up to the 2000, which is exactly where I'm at, right? And when I do that, right, let me change this, no, let me erase here a little bit. So when I do that, okay, I have my, in year 4, I have my 2500 less my accumulated depreciation of 2000, which hits me right on my salvage value or my residual value of $500. Okay. Now, I am going to carry the 2000 over into year 5 and the book value into year 5. Okay. And you have to fill out that last line. You have to fill out that last year. You can't just say, okay, I hit my residual value of 500 here. I don't have to do anything else to my schedule. No, you do have to put in your year 5. And even though I can't take any additional depreciation for the year, I have to show it as 0. So my depreciation, just my accumulated depreciation stays the same for year 5, and so does the book value. Because remember, the book value, it should be, our salvage value at that point in time in year 5. Okay. So I hope that made sense. The two things that are most important is, one, like I have here, one, you have to calculate your percentage, your rate. And your rate, you determine it by taking 100% less what you decide for the years in useful life, and then multiplying it times a factor, and that factor is thought of as a number that accelerates, increasing acceleration of depreciation all the way up to a factor of 2, which is the most that you can take. And in this case here, based upon 5 years and a factor of 2, I end up with a rate of 40%. If this was 10, 100% over 10 years, okay, that's 10%. And if I multiply it by 2, the maximum, my rate would be 20%. That's the maximum. Okay, so it changes depending upon the useful life and whichever rate you decide to use. All right, that's the first thing, right, that you have to kind of pay attention to. And you go and you create your schedule. When you're creating your schedule, you have to pay attention to when you're going to hit the maximum allowable depreciation. I have a tendency to equate this to payroll. Okay, remember when you were doing Social Security that you had a limit, all right? Let's say 87,000. Well, if you had a year to date here, the difference between these two is the only amount that could possibly be taxed. Okay, well, this is the same kind of thinking. Okay, if I'm only able to take 2,000 as my maximum, okay, well, as I have increasing amounts of depreciation, all right, I have to pay attention to when I can only take up to that 2,000, even though my calculation might say, oh, well, I should be up here greater than 2,000. I can't take that full amount. I can only take the difference between where I'm at and whatever my salvage value is going to, the depreciatable amount to hit my salvage value, right? So, and I showed that, to look at that in two different ways. I can either keep paying attention by looking at the book value and seeing how close I get to my salvage value here, or I can look at my accumulate depreciation and see, when I hit the difference when I get to that limit of how much I can possibly depreciate. Okay. And then, of course, the math in the table works the same. We've seen that. So that's it for declining balance or double declining balance. And the same thought process of having this rate, calculating this rate, we will be using that for makers, right, in the next set of videos. So I'm going to stop here and see you in the makers videos.